Hi, I'm Katie, and this is the Free Art and Design School podcast, web series, whatever. I have one of my favorite people here to talk to. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Candice Navi. Katie and I know each other from CalArts, doing our MFA together. I
Can-
finished that 2 years ago.
Candice was like my main mentor and life guide, and I probably would not have finished the program without her. So I feel very excited that you can talk to me about your artistic journey. I'm
Oh,
curious sort of when you started being an artist and designer, because it feels like you've been doing it your whole life, maybe not your whole life.
honestly, it's hard to point to a time. I feel like the older I get, the more I look back on my past and I can be like, oh, like that was kind of graphic design. Like that's kind of crazy. My parents had this super old like computer software on like whatever desktop Dell thing that we had that let you make greeting cards
Oh,
and
cool.
like you could customize them and everything, and I would spend hours on that. I'm like, that was graphic design.
That was
Or like I used
bookmarks.
to make what?
I did that with bookmarks on my mom's old computer. I was like obsessed with making bookmarks.
Oh
So
my god, fun. Oh my god, I wish I thought of that. That's such a good idea.
there's always time.
Yeah, it's not too late. Thank you. Or like I used to be really into making PowerPoints like for fun in seventh grade.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, major nerd alert. So yeah, it's been a journey.
So when you were applying to college, did you know that you wanted to do design and like more artistic things or not really?
No, not at all. I always thought of it as like this thing I did for fun, not like, wow, I'm gonna make my entire career of this. That came later. That wasn't even an option, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For
No,
me.
weirdly, entirely coincidental, you're the second person from USC's art school that I'm talking
Oh,
to today. So,
nice.
do you want to talk about your sort of transition through undergrad and then onto grad school and sort of how you figured out what you liked working on?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I mentioned, graphic design and like kind of with photography were just things I did for fun. And then sometimes got paid to do by my classmates. And then went to college, went to USC for undergrad. And then I was like, oh, there's classes in this. Like, this is actually like a thing that people study and do. And like, it's a legitimate discipline. Like, I didn't go to an art high school, and no one pursued the arts really like seriously from my prep school, my LA prep school. So that was all very novel to me. And I really enjoyed the classes I took in undergrad, but still wasn't a major. It was a minor. I was like being non-committal about graphic design for some reason.
It's it's a love-hate relationship, that kind of field. So,
Definitely. I think I was just scared that it wouldn't be a sustainable thing that I could actually do because I just didn't know anyone else that did it. You know what I mean? I didn't have an example.
I think that's kind of why a lot of people don't go into the arts, especially if your like parents don't know artists who have full-time jobs who are stable. It can feel very scary and like you sort of want to like pressure people against it if you don't know that it's going to work out. Which I think is really unfortunate and maybe sort of the part of doing a project like this is like educating people that like you can be a successful artist, you can make it your career, and if you do things right, you won't starve, hopefully. Um, but
Yeah.
I see people like you as a real inspiration. You're very consistently good at what you do and like good at empowering and lifting up other people. So I think it's really inspiring seeing everything you've accomplished. Also, you're 2 years ahead of me in the program. So I'm like, well, Candice is thriving. So
Literally too nice. Well, yeah, I feel happy with where I'm at, but it was a journey, as you know.
yes.
So gotta take some L's to get the W's, I guess.
What made you feel like you wanted to do an MFA or had to do an MFA?
So during undergrad, I was like, okay, by the end of undergrad, I was like, you know what? I had an epiphany. I was like, I want to do graphic design, like F it. Um, I like decided it was worth trying, like kind of a if not now, then when vibe. And then I worked in tech for 4 years doing like marketing design and then UI UX design. And basically after like during undergrad, I was like, I don't feel like I'm done with school. Like I love being in academic environments, and I didn't know what version of school I would do, but I just felt like I wasn't done. And then as I worked through my career, my design career, I was just like, UI UX design, cool. I enjoy it, but it's not all I want to do. Like I wanted to feel more empowered to make and do anything.
Yeah.
And that was when I was like, I should look into MFA programs. And I researched that for like 2 or 3 years because I'm crazy.
Wow.
I literally talked to everybody I could possibly find. I visited most of the schools I applied to just over time. Yeah, I was like, this is a big decision. I like researched a lot.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's crazy. The first person I interviewed for this was Megan, and she was like, "Oh, I just only applied to CalArts and hoped it worked, and then I went there." And I was like, "What the fuck?" So like now we have like the full spectrum of like the MFA decision.
That's wild. Yeah, no. It was like the most thoughtful decision I've ever made. That's so funny. Wow, cannot relate. But that's great that it worked out for her.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's also kind of a sign that like graphic design attracts like a really wide variety of people, people without design backgrounds, people with design backgrounds. Like it's such a diverse field that like in terms of things that you do, that it feels like there's so many different entry points into becoming a designer. Like in my class alone, we had engineers, writers, English majors, philosophy majors, like people who wanted to develop their artistic work in a systematic way with different motivations. And I think that's kind of like nice. And it's cool that you already knew so much about design when you came into the program. Do you think that was helpful, or like you had to unlearn a lot of things, or
That's such a good question. I feel like I okay, it was helpful in the sense that I didn't have to learn any of the software. Like I already knew the technical skills, but having to let go of my ego, having to let go of what I think is good enough or something, like just pushing the boundaries of what was possible was not something I had really done before. You know what I mean? Um, so in that way, just what design even is, like expanding upon that, was also not initially challenging, but just something I am thankful I learned.
yeah. Well, CalArts is a lot more theoretical than any design you would experience outside of grad school.
Outside in the real world. Yeah, it's true.
Real world. It's still a fake world. Everything's fake.
That's true. Nothing's real. It's very true.
Yeah. Did you find it pretty challenging initially to like broaden your understanding of what design was, or did it feel sort of liberating to like see so many different genres, mediums, applications? Because you made such an incredible wealth of work, and your thesis, which maybe you can talk about later or never again, was super broad and expansive.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing about graphic design. Like you were talking about how so many people from different disciplines were in your class. Like that is what makes design so interesting and rich as a discipline, as an art practice, whatever you want to call it. Like graphic design is everything. Like whenever I try to explain to people what graphic design is, I'm like, literally everything you touch, look at, like someone designed that. You're reading a book, someone designed it. You're turning left on the street, like someone made that sign. Like truly, design is everything.
It is. It's
getting excited about graphic design.
That's that's why one of the things that I was really interested in my last year is I wrote a book about my first master's was in the philosophy of language. Kind of accidentally, I ran out of philosophy of science classes, and they were like, you can't do that again, so you have to take something else. And then when I was graduating, I was like, oh, like graphic design really is like a non-linguistic language that like because it's something that you have to learn, you have to be taught it. It's not an inherent feature of nature, but also in certain ways becomes universal when everyone around the world has like a shared common vocabulary of symbols. Um, and then it just becomes this like almost passive part of your existence where unless you're living in the forest, every day you're interacting with literally thousands of pieces of design and graphic design and product design, which is maybe overwhelming. But then you also get the joy of like pointing things out to people, like what font that is, and you know how someone chose that color choice or why there's contrast in this certain way. So I feel very lucky to have been able to learn about these things.
Totally. It feels like we speak a different language sometimes.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's like maybe I guess what I'm doing with these interviews is I think art school people will often say you don't need art school. And like that could be a kind of like therapy induced like reflexive thing. But I do think that some of the theoretical stuff that we learned was really important. And like some of the articles that they would have us read are really life changing and like change your outlook on how culture shapes society. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like your personal design philosophy and where you are at now that you have a job and you work in the real world and you have both practical and really theoretical um, attachments to design.
For sure. I think it's kind of interesting now having the CalArts experience, which is, like you said, super conceptual, honestly, not very reality based at all, to put it lightly, in the best way possible. And go into the world that I'm in now, like branding, which is super rooted in reality. But they're actually not that different because, at least in branding, for example, like it's a lot of world building.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we did a lot of that in the projects that we did, even though the reality was an alternate reality while we were there.
Totally.
I think the principles and ideas totally apply. Just like the way we think about making and the way we think through making, that's like the CalArts go-to phrase. Things that maybe don't make sense until you actually do it. And then you're like, oh, like I need to just iterate and not like overthink myself into a hole.
Yeah, that's 100% the hardest part of CalArts is like not doing the overthinking.
Mhm.
That and all the crying, but mostly the overthinking. How
Love both.
Oh God. How did you so your thesis, one of the things that you made was a reality TV show and you did all the like titles, you did all the sort of like I mean you did literally everything, you shot everything, you were in it, you acted. Like how how do you sort of approach doing projects like that or branding where you're like doing a whole suite of different disparate elements that still have to like be cohesive? Like how do you break apart really large challenges like that? Because it seems like you do it really effortlessly.
Very sweet of you. Um, yeah, I feel like kind of like what I was saying, like world building, like almost thinking about whatever project you're working on as its own person, like personifying the work. Like what feelings does this project have and what personality traits does this project have or brand or whatever poster, business card, I don't know, something more interesting, book. Like what feelings does this evoke and what feelings does it have itself?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm a super emotional person, so I feel like that's just how I approach everything, thinking about inanimate objects' feelings. And even like the characters that are in it, right? Like I made a TV show, like there were literal characters, myself included. Um, there are characters, you can think of anything as a character, even literally like a letter, literal character, the best kind.
Yeah, I think that's such a unique way of looking at it, and like also one of the reasons I'm interested in interviewing different people because like I've no one has ever taught a class and been like these are the emotional aspects of you know the thing that you're creating, or maybe they have, but I've never heard it phrased sort of like the way that you just did it. And I think like your personal philosophy on design is such an interesting one, and also why you should be a professor at some point. Um, you gotta do it. And also, I mean, like, I've learned so much. Not you were never my professor, but just being friends with you for whatever 3-4 years now, like I've learned so much just through passive osmosis of like hanging out with you. I'm sort of wondering if you what were like some important, maybe more emotional lessons you learned about being a designer while in school or after school that have helped you. I mean, you're very much like a confident badass, and I see you as like a kind of, I'm saying all these compliments because I haven't seen you in forever, but like you're someone I really admire a lot, and I think I'd like to know how you got to where you are.
Okay, well, first of all, I also admire you. Literally, the way you come up with ideas and you execute them so effortlessly. Like, as someone who comes up with ideas and then doesn't execute them or doesn't finish them, I'm blown away by your ability to actually follow through.
Well, they're not design projects. That's the kicker.
Okay, but you also finish those too. Um, okay, wait, what was your question again?
It's like emotional lessons and how to be confident in your work.
Hmm. Okay, yeah. I would say, I think being open to criticism actually makes me feel more confident, which almost doesn't make any sense. But it's almost like if you're open to feedback, especially from people you respect, ideally, and whose feedback you actually are soliciting, you can kind of sit back and be like, I know that I can be better. I think what I have now is pretty good or decent or terrible, whatever, but I want to get better. It's like that desire of like wanting to go further and wanting to improve weirdly makes me confident in my work because I'm not coming from it like, and I used to, but not anymore, come from like an arrogant place of like, yeah, like I know this is the shit. Like, what could anyone ever say about this? It's foolproof, and then get it critiqued and have your world crumble. We've all been there.
Yep.
So I think just changing the attitude I go into making with in general, of being more open and less like anchored in my thoughts and my opinions, just makes it easier.
Yeah. You're not protecting your babies anymore. You're letting them fly, leave the nest.
Oh yeah. No, not married to anything. What's that phrase? Kill your darlings.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
always, I took a painting class in college, and my teacher told the story about how like the first assignment is to kill the precious, so that you can actually like fix things and change them. And how when she was a student, one of her teachers came up to her and was like, you've just made this painting you think is perfect, but like you haven't changed it at all. And so she made her like take a huge dab of red paint and just like put it somewhere on the canvas. And how that was like very traumatic to her, but also like very informative. And I weirdly haven't taken that class in forever. Think about that once a week. Like
Mm.
that particular story about how like you need to be able to fuck with your shit, so to speak, in order to like make it get better. Um, how do you
Yes.
sort of avoid getting stuck in your work?
I think, okay, so my favorite part of design is research.
Hmm.
I love not actually making anything. And I love just looking and like consuming as much as possible. Like I love, unfortunately, looking at my phone endlessly and using TikTok and reading articles and watching TV and watching movies, like talking to people, traveling, like all of that to me is visual research ultimately, or even like literally like going on the internet and intentionally researching design. I feel like that keeps me excited and that keeps me moving forward, just always feeling inspired by even the most mundane things.
Your Instagram stories are a museum. Like every time you post, because you also like frame your images so well. So even if it's like a plant with the sky in the background, I'm like, ah, peak Candice. Like I don't know.
Yes,
Do you think in another lifetime you would have been a photographer or a critical theorist? Because it feels like you have such an academic in a positive way, like such a well thought out approach to being a designer.
totally. Yeah. That's a great point. I also love photography, and photography like brought me to design actually. But I never wanted to do it professionally. I was always like, this is mine.
Yeah,
I do this for myself. I don't want it to be tainted by like reality.
I feel that. Do you find yourself um do you find that you make time for artistic hobbies other than sort of like passively engaging with the world in an artistic way, or do you sort of like not do that?
I go through phases. I took a ceramics class. I watercolor sometimes. I love collaging. Whenever unfortunately, I'm very social, and that ends up taking up a lot of my time. But when I'm not being social every so often, yeah, I love doing just something that's not on a computer.
Yeah, I completely feel that. Yeah, I completely relate to that given like I've been doing so much of this, like this project that
Mhm.
like I've had to actually force myself to make time during the day to like do art, which is
You're great at
hilarious.
that though.
Well,
Watercolor.
but I mean, I'll do like one sketch a day and post it, and people will be like, "Oh, Katie's making art." But for me, that was like 20 minutes of being creative. But I guess so much of what I do is also very social and community oriented. And I'm at a point in my life where I think that's maybe more important than making the art.
Yeah.
Although I don't know, I don't really want to say that because I think the whole reason I got into doing stuff like this was that I wanted to live life more fully, and that involves having tea in the morning and drawing and like reading poetry and like kind of like you said, being so artistically engaged with just mundane elements of the world. Um, who are there any artists that are inspiring you right now, or any like movies, art forms, other things that
Hmm.
you're bringing into your practice or thinking about?
Well, I'm always thinking about my favorite photographer.
Really?
Uh, yes, literally always. I love him so much. His name is Stephen Shore.
Okay.
He epitomizes appreciating the mundane. If you look up his work, you're gonna be like, oh, of course, Candice. Like, well, you'll be like, oh, this guy's completely influences Candace's aesthetic. Like, it'll all make sense. I love him. He's kind of old now. I don't know how old he is, but he has an Instagram. I follow him.
I
He
will.
has several books published, obviously. Um, he just like observes. He's very observant. And I like to think I have a similar approach to making. I also really love Wolfgang Tillmans. He's also a photographer, also very good at capturing the mundane, but also the extreme. He has a wider range in his work. And I saw his not a retrospective, but like kind of a mid-career show at MoMA a few months ago, and it was amazing. Like just the way the exhibition was set up. And that's another thing too, like being in the physical world and like having your work in the physical world.
Yeah.
It's a
It
whole other.
feels like we're constant, like even as digital as you and I are, you probably more than me, actually. Um, you you know how to use Photoshop and you love it versus me who
Oh. I thought you meant digital like social media. I was like, we're both pretty active on social media.
yeah, no, that's my main character flaw, one of many. But yeah,
Oh,
it feels like the fight as a graphic designer is like because the field has become entirely digital for the most part, like getting off the screen, getting back into the things that are like really inspiring. It's insane to like go through one of the history classes at CalArts and see how like people in the 60s, I sound like a literal child, people made things without computers. But it's crazy to see some of the stuff people used to make and like make by hand, or like have an amount of precision in their drawing, that seems sort of unthinkable now without a computer. And I think that's one of the reasons I really appreciated CalArts is like you were just swamped with inspiration 24/7, almost to the extent that it's overwhelming. Actually, it definitely was
yeah.
overwhelming. I don't know if you felt that way, but um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
I have to say, if it wasn't for the digital tools that we have now, I don't think I would be a graphic designer, to be honest. Like, I don't know what probably like a lawyer, like my parents wanted me to be. You can relate to that. I just feel like I'm not the best at drawing, honestly, and I feel like so much of graphic design was like I do stuff by hand, but I'm not particularly good at it. And I kind of am okay with not being good at it because I have other ways to express myself. But if that was the only one, I think I would get frustrated. Maybe I would be better at it. Who knows?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of all the tactile things that you've made, like the screen printed bumper stickers, like you just said, you took a ceramics class, you do watercolors, even if you're not good at drawing, like that actually probably just would have given you a really unique style that helped you stand out. I think, I don't know, we all find our paths and are drawn to different things, whether we want to be or not. Graphic design kind of feels like an inescapable black hole in many ways, but I love it. What do you think has been like really rewarding about the journey that you've been on for the last decade or so, I guess?
As a designer?
Yeah. Or as a human, whatever.
Yeah, whichever, one and the same. I think you can't have one without the other, obviously. I would say I feel very lucky that I get to do something that I like really care about and like genuinely enjoy doing. And I feel like not only do I get to do it, but I get to be a part of the discourse and culture and practice. Like that's all I ever really wanted. And I'm only dipping my toe in it. Hopefully it continues, but just getting to consume culture and make culture and like just osmosis with it all. I don't know how to put it. Like just the give and take of consuming and making.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's so beautiful. It's awesome.
That also feels like a really unique era we live in where like because we have social media, we get to put sort of everything or as much as we want out there and it immediately becomes part of the zeitgeist. Maybe not, I don't know, like I post things and 10 people see it, but like in the old days you wouldn't be able to do that, you know, without having a gallery show. Like it feels like we've democratized something like art and design, which has its ups and downs. Social media and art is like a whole other discussion, but
Yeah.
it does feel really unique that we get to like become a living active part of the design world just by doing it, which I feel like we really talked about a lot at school. Like all the projects were like, make an Instagram page, make a web app, make X, Y, and Z, go do an exhibition, go do blah, blah, blah. Which I think is a really helpful way of thinking about design. Is like you said earlier, like a huge part of reality. Everything is designed and everything is designed. Do you have any sort of like, I don't know, like where do you think your personal design journey is going? Because it's such a diverse field. Like, is there a part of design that you're really interested in now that you want to pursue more of?
Mm. Yeah, I think I'm very content with where my trajectory is headed. I think my main goals as a designer are to have my work seen by as many people as possible, and to influence culture. And I think I'm hopefully inching my way towards both of those things happening more and more. I just have such a appreciation for art history and like pop culture that it just feels so exciting to potentially contribute to that in any way.
Do you have what's your sort of personal answer on like whether you consider yourself like an individual artist? Because that like everything you just described is very much like what an artist with their own style and history and gallery space and all that does versus like more traditional design career paths are rarely as sort of culturally present or like famous in the way that an individual artist would be.
Yeah. Okay, wait, repeat the question.
That was phrased super poorly. I just like when we're graduating, they ask us like what you want your design practice to be like. And I feel like in general, there's like two camps that are like, I'm either going to be an individual artist who like makes artistic design that ends up in a gallery space and I have my own personal practice, versus the other end of the spectrum. And this is a false dichotomy, obviously, but the other end of the spectrum is like I work in corporate design and I like do my own thing with my own style, but I'm very much like tied into a larger sort of like structure of design or network of design, and it's much less individual. And I'm sort of wondering how you handle that when you work in a corporate setting doing like amazing branding suites, but also you have such an individual drive to be seen as an artist who influences culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. I would definitely say what you're saying is correct. Like there is, especially coming out of CalArts, kind of that either or, like either you are an independent graphic designer or you're like part of a larger entity. I like to think I'm both. Even in my corporate job, I like to think that I infuse everything we've talked about into the work I make. And I challenge myself to do it. Like it's easy to kind of almost tuck yourself away. Like we're trained as designers to be like, okay, like I'm a conduit. This
Right.
isn't about me. Even though CalArts was very much, this was all about you. But in a professional context, we are more than capable of being like, okay, no, it's actually not about me. And that's not to say I don't do that sometimes, but I really challenge myself to be like, no, like I'm going to push this further. I'm going to infuse myself in this, even if it's just in the color palette, even if it's just in the typefaces I choose, whatever it may be. I always set out to somehow bring myself to everything.
Mm-hmm. I think you succeed. Your work is very you, and you never seem like you're compromising your values and your interests for any other perspective, which is good. Um, I'm wondering, as we're towards the end here, if you have life advice that you would give either to young designers or to your younger self who's just beginning their journey into the insanity that is the world of graphic design.
Oh my God, younger kids. Um, I would say that we're never done learning. Like
Yeah.
I feel like overeducated at this point, and I still feel like I'm learning all the time. And that's what makes design so cool. Like it's constantly evolving, constantly changing. The tools we have at our disposal to make design keep changing. Like we're going to be replaced by robots. I'm so excited. Genuinely really excited for that. I'm like, please,
No,
you do
Candice.
it. That's a whole other conversation. It's really cool. It's really exciting to just feel like you're never done and the industry's never done and everything's just always evolving. It's just fun.
Yeah. So
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 I would
after doing
say
the MFA, you feel like you don't need to do any more school. You finally reached your peak academic
at
interest.
least, I mean, I'm not saying I won't take another ceramics class, but I'm definitely saying, yeah, the degrees are done.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't even talk about it, but your CalArts experience was the inverse of mine, which is like absolutely fucking crazy. You did your first year and a half on
Yeah.
campus, and then the other year and a half online when I met you, and then I did the reverse where I had COVID initially, and then came to campus later. Um,
Crazy.
do you have do you think that, I mean, obviously it affected you and your practice and your emotional state? Now looking back on it with a little bit of distance, not that much distance, but a little bit of distance, do you have like thoughts about that and where you are now and how you got here?
Oh my God. I mean, I'm just really thankful for that year and a half that wasn't digital. And honestly, the year and a half that was, like, I really feel like you included, like, we all really made the most of a really shitty situation. And yeah, I mean, it was terrible. It was really hard. It's definitely not what anyone signed up for. But feeling like I was persevering and making despite the circumstances felt really empowering.
And you,
So
I mean, people still talk about your projects and show them as examples in classes. So like you clearly did a lot right despite the trauma. Um, and
that's
yeah, I don't know. I've just always really looked up to you and been inspired by you. And you and I have a similar I don't know whether our self-worth is tied to like constantly doing things and learning things, but we have the same sort of illness that
totally
causes us to maybe overdo it sometimes. And I,
hyperactive.
yeah,
It's awful.
I appreciate your perspective and thoughts a lot. Do you have any sort of like parting comments on design and getting through it and just life in general, or not?
Yeah, you are, first of all, way too good for my ego, but I would say
After the video is just compliments.
I love it. I'm here for it. Um, I would say to just always stay excited, kind of what we're talking about. Like you and I love just like constantly talking, doing, experiencing. Like sometimes it's hard to keep that momentum, but I would say do your best to not lose it because it's beautiful. You, me, anyone who's watching this, like bringing that energy and love for design is, I don't know, it's kind of everything. I can't imagine making without it.
Well, that's a perfect ending note. I don't think you or I, as Jewish women, are ever not going to be talking and inspired by the world. So,
Never not talking.
never not talking. There are several things that you've said could be on t-shirts that one of us should design. So, that feels good. You have a very succinct philosophy on life, and I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks, dude.
All
A
right.
lot from you, especially philosophy queen.